Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Togainu no Chi. So, last time we met the Christian Igra fighter, and after we told him what would Jesus do, he backed off. And he turned tail and ran. So now Akira and Keisuke just have to sort of process what just happened. As Akira turned back to Keisuke, a flash of metal on the ground caught his eye. The man's tag. He must have forgotten it in his rage. You mean in his piety? Had the cross truly meant that much to him? He wasn't full of rage, he was full of love for the Lord. The tag was a 10. Together with Akira's jack, it made the beginnings of a straight. But the memory of that man's desperate glare made Akira reluctant to add it to his collection. Instead, he tucked it into his jacket pocket. It would stay there for the moment. Keisuke was looking at him like a remorseful puppy. He retrieved Keisuke's backpack and tossed it to him, together with his salvage tag. Akira picked up his own bag, then rubbed his cheek, but the sensation of the knife's close passage still lingered. Keisuke lowered his eyes in shame. Kinda makes you feel like an idiot for even deciding to join this tournament, huh? As for some reason the music sounds way louder than their voices. But that can't be. Look at the music. At least in my ears it does. Like, I don't... Can I adjust this slightly? Alright. Now it's probably going to be so quiet in editing. Oh my god. I just know it's going to be so quiet in editing, and I'm going to be like, you can barely even hear the music at all. Ugh. In the depths of his ears, those words overlapped with the voice of a much younger Keisuke. You're amazing, Akira. He hadn't changed. Keisuke hadn't changed one bit. With sudden, inexplicable anger, Akira rammed his knife back into its sheath and began walking without a word. The sun had begun its evening descent, but the light still failed to penetrate the alleyways. He sensed Keisuke following him, but didn't turn around. The fight was over, but a trace of excitement still lingered in his body. As his head cooled, he recalled the euphoria that he'd felt each time their blades had crossed. As if nerves long atrophied had suddenly come alive. The man had been trying to kill him. Any one of these blows might have opened his skull. He had been one step away from death. Little by little, that knowledge rose within him. It was a sensation he'd never experienced before. A numbness spreading through him like bubbles in a glass. What if he had stabbed his opponents? If he'd struck a vital area, then the man would have died. His blood gushing forth, his temperature dropping. What, are you getting some kind of, like, murder kink? What's going on? The light in his eyes would have faded as Akira watched. The image brought with it a wave of uncertainty. He had taken his first step into forbidden territory. What was this feeling? Like a vast black tongue working its way up his spine? What? Black tongue working its way up your spine? What are you talking about? Anticipation? What? Was it doubt? Fear? Impatience? Was it all of them or none? He felt as if he'd wandered into a labyrinth. Even as those thoughts filled his head, his feet carried him down the shadowy road to where he did not know. No idea what this black tongue nonsense is about. Where the hell are we? The room was lit by a faint, warm glow of the lamp. Are we back in Viscio's place somehow? I don't know the statues. The room's master found this level of lighting calm. He had tried using candles, but that had been the same. The image they created was wrong. The elegant S-shaped lamp was perfect. He'd been lucky to find it in an antique store, and wise to purchase it when he had. So he goes antiquing often? He surveyed his inner sanctum with a satisfied smile. Truly he had done well to assemble this collection. A crimson sofa adorned with modest gold embroidery, stately wooden furniture reminiscent of 18th century Europe, a real Persian carpet. Along the wall was a fireplace meant purely for show, piled high with charcoal. The decor was precisely what one would expect, given the taste on display in the rest of the palace, but it was still peculiar to find it packed with so many statues of young boys. Are these the young boys that we've been talking about? I mean, they look like they could be, teenage boys at least. Maybe even young men. Stranger still, these statues were damaged. Each was missing an essential part, such as an arm or a leg or a head. The paintings he had paid a princely sum to frame were likewise eerie pieces that called to mind blood and darkness in bodies.
どうした?今日はいつもより甘えてくるじゃないか。
And this is disgusting. Answering an insistent nasal whine, the room's master, Arbitro, smiled affectionately at the boy in black bondage gear resting upon his knee. The horrid scars on his porcelain skin stood out sharply in the glow of the lamp. Oops, trying to make the dialogue go away. There we go. Yuck. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Indeed, this was the very same dog who had been with executioners the day before. Why are we suddenly just getting a window into this, Why are we suddenly getting a window into Arbitro's private life? This was his home, the one place he could rest, at his beloved master's side. Are we going to see something go on between him and the dog? Arbitro's fingertips burrowed tenderly into his soft white hair. A shiver of pleasure ran up the dog's spine, and he rubbed his cheek against his master's leg even harder. Saliva dripped from the gag onto Arbitro's knee. His words were accusatory, but his tone was infinitely gentle and compassionate. With his fingertips, he gathered the saliva and deposited it upon his tongue. The taste was exquisite. Such was the depth of Arbitro's love. He whispered, giving an earlobe a teasing nibble. The dog jumped slightly and turned a longing look upon his master. He can't look at anything. Through his blindfold, Arbitro could tell that his eyes were moist with delight. Or would be if he still had eyes beneath the fabric. Arbitro thought back to the day he had found this wonderful creature. It had been love at first sight. It had been long before Japan was divided into East and West during the period of chaos in the immediate aftermath of the war. This boy had been cruelly abused by his parents and left to die upon the roadside. Arbitro had found him and decided to take him in. His prepubescent body had been pitifully malnourished, with protruding ribs, unkempt hair, limbs like twigs, and skin so pale that Arbitro had nearly thought him a corpse. So Arbitro thought, why not just pluck out those eyeballs, scar him up a bit, and put him in a leather gimp suit, and make him act like a dog. It just makes perfect sense. When Arbitro gave him a bath and warm food and wrapped him gently in a soft blanket, the boy had shown him a tearful smile. It was a beautiful sight, so fragile and fleeting that it made Arbitro want to embrace him to death. Surely he would never find anyone more precious. There was only one thing to do. He would turn this boy into the ultimate work of art. Each cut Arbitro made into his soft white flesh revealed another layer of beauty. The blood dripping from the incisions, the white fat oozing beneath his skin, his muscles, his bones, his right pulsing organs. All of it beautiful. His feeble screams had made Arbitro tremble with pleasure. In pursuit of perfection, Arbitro had planned every step of the process in detail, right down to the shape and size of the scars. Even when he had removed the boy's larynx, he had been careful to produce the perfect wound to balance out all the rest. Few of Arbitro's subjects could withstand his love. Most were killed attempting to escape or went mad and committed suicide, or died of shock on the operating table. But this boy endured to the end. His humanity had left him, true, but still he remained at Arbitro's side, his most sublime and successful production. He adored Arbitro with his whole being. How could Arbitro help but love him? Even now, when he found the right material, he would carve it up to make it one of his creations. When possible, he preferred unripe young bodies, but what mattered above all else was their faces to be lovely. A dreaming smile played about his mouth as he caressed his dog's hair.
鼻の方はどうだ調子はいいか
He took hold of the dog's jaw and tilted it upwards, scrutinizing his neatly shaped nose. The dog's sense of smell was the one modification that had not been inspired by Arbitro's personal tastes, but instead by the demands of his position. He needed a way to track the tags. As thorough as Arbitro was in keeping tabs on his fighters, they were, after all, a bunch of thugs. There had always been fools who tried to steal tags instead of winning them in the ring. He didn't actually care one bit about foul play, but they would stop fighting altogether if he permitted it. And if they didn't fight, they would not need rain. All of this was pointless without a market for his drug, hence the executioners. From time to time, he had his dog accompany the executioners on their rounds. He thought it nice that the pet got a taste of the outside world while performing his duties. Sometimes he came back soiled or injured, but that was nothing. A brief stint on Arbitro's operating table and he was as good as new. As he reminisced, Arbitro's fingers crawled towards the surgical star beneath the dog's up-tilted chin.
一番美しい
Arbitro murmured, enraptured. He leaned forward and pressed his hot tongue to the spot. The dog's breathing grew faster and harder. Arbitro never grew tired of this pet, no matter how many nights he indulged. Why are we here reading this, though? He knew that this was not a hobby that he could readily reveal. There had been times in the past when it had earned him scorn or condemnation. I don't think you're really hiding it if you're letting it walk the streets of Igra. He understood why this was, but he also knew in his heart that he was doing nothing wrong. This was his purpose. Without it, life was meaningless. He loved dolls. Dolls with warm blood in their veins. Dolls that belonged only to him. When he was young, he had witnessed his mother and father sneaking strange young boys into their bedrooms. Always young boys with you. His parents had treated them like dolls, sometimes beating them bloody, sometimes awing them until their cries died away. Despite that, he could tell his parents loved them, far more than they loved him. He would own dolls of his own one day. Surely then he would not be lonely. Imagine you're a little boy and your parents are bringing home little boys every night to Big R. And they never Big R you. What's wrong with you? I guess that's what Arbitro thought. Images of a past he did not care to remember rose in Arbitro's mind. Memories piled atop one another, shifting, warping before his eyes. In the end, they resolved into the face of the man he hated more than anyone else in the world. Girl, calm down. Motomi, god damn it. Motomi was the one that, he's the reporter, right? He spat the name like a curse. Motomi, the cause of his downfall. The man who had ground his shining future into dust. The face that floated in his mind's eye wore a smile. The instant he recalled his defeat, rage swept through him, turning his vision scarlet. He could feel sweat dripping from beneath his mask. It was only when he had heard a desperate gasping in his ear that he realized he was wringing the dog's neck. The dog, struggling to draw breath through his gag, scratched feebly at Arbitro's hand. Arbitro immediately returned to his senses, the blood draining from his face. He released the dog's thin neck and wrapped him in a tight embrace. Shoulders heaving as he gulped for breath, the dog wound his arms around Arbitro's back. Even as he buried his face in the dog's sleek hair, Arbitro's dark glare remained fixed on the past. That was weird. And just out of nowhere. How weird and out of nowhere was that? After recovering, it's like, what was the point of it? I guess if you're really attracted to that dog, you got some backstory on it. You know? After recovering Keisuke's tag from the blue-haired guy, Akira decided to head back to the abandoned cafe before doing anything else. The cafe looked the same as before, inconspicuous, deserted. Why would it not look the same? That was until they drew closer to the doorless entrance. Keisuke stepped forward and frowned as if he too had sensed a shift in atmosphere. Before you even step inside, you can tell something's off. Interesting. Akira had known this would happen sooner or later. In a lawless town such as this, no building would remain vacant for long. He peered in through the entrance. The pale afternoon light shone down on a bizarre spectacle. Oh, they mean this cafe. For some reason I thought they meant the other one. I thought they meant the club they went to. But no, they just mean the place they were sleeping at. Dust motes danced above half a dozen fallen men. Were they asleep? No, that one's eyes were open and rolled towards the back of his head. Unconscious then, someone had knocked these men out. But who? He caught sight of a small figure crouching at the back of the store. Just as Akira was about to step closer, he heard a beep, and then a blinding flash forced him to cover his eyes. Keisuke muttered as he blinked to clear his eyes. The crouching figure looked up at the sound of his voice. But Akira and Keisuke reached for we already know who it is. Whoever it was must have something to do with what had happened here. As the shadow swayed to its feet, they braced for the inevitable attack. The last thing they expected was for the shadow to spread its arms in welcome. Hey, you're still looking ugly. Their minds momentarily went blank. It couldn't be. But there was no mistaking that shock of golden hair, the digital camera in his hand. The digital camera? That's what there's no mistaking? Interesting. As his shock faded, Keisuke let out the breath he'd been holding. Ren's smile was that of a child who had successfully pulled off a prank.
ああ、そうそう。アキラたちさ、トシマついてからずっとここにいるでしょ。一箇所にじっとしてるとさ、危ないから。それ教えようと思ってきたら、ちょうどっていうかナイスタイミングっつうか。なんか変なのがゾロゾロ中へ入ってくとこだったわけ。もし、アキラたちがまだ中にいたらまずいと思って、慌てて入ったんだけどいなかったからさ。よかったんだけど、まあ、そんで。
Ren prodded the man closest to him with the toe of his boot.
今度は俺見て襲いかかってきたからさ、撃退したとこ。この人数を一人で。うん。
Keisuke's jaw dropped.
だから俺強いって言ってんじゃん。外見が可愛いからって舐めたら痛い目見るぞ。
Ren puffed out his chest proudly.
さっき写真撮ってなかったか？
うん、撮ってたよ。
こんなところで撮るものなんてあるのか？
あるよ。ほら、周りに転がってるじゃない。
The only things around them were garbage, rubble, and unconscious men, so they're not dead. They kind of look dead, but fine. Standing in their midst, Ren twirled like a girl in a field of flowers. Ew.
武骨な男ども、地にひれ伏すのぜ。
Keisuke and Akira shared a glance. They were both thinking the same thing. Who would buy a photograph like that? That aside, Akira took a closer look at the men. They certainly didn't look weak. He was beginning to suspect that Ren's boasts were not entirely unfounded, idiot.
ああ、ケイスケ、結局どうしたの今日？イグ。
Oops. Keisuke lifted the tag at his breast, a rueful smile playing on his lips.
あ、本当だ。とうとう登録しちゃったんだね。
I hate when he narrows his eyes like that. He looks even worse. After examining the tag, Ren smiled.
じゃあさ、記念に一枚撮ろうよ。はい、アキラも入って入って。
こんなところで撮るのか？
フラッシュあるから平気。
そういう問題じゃ。
いいからいいから。
Ren maneuvered Keisuke next to the unmoving Akira, then readied his camera.
アキラいつも仏頂面じゃん。まあいいけどさ。はい、撮るよ。
The flash blinked a few times, followed by the crisp snap of the shutter. Ren took another half-dozen photos in rapid succession. By the end, Akira was seeing stars.
オッケー
Ren gave them an enthusiastic thumbs up. He looked inordinately pleased with himself.
リンってさ、悩みとかなさそうだよな。
Keisuke mumbled, his expression a mixture of weariness and exasperation.
失礼だな。これでも悩み事の一つや二つや三つや四つぐらいね。
That was when something tumbled, rustling out of Ren's open waist pouch.
ありゃ。
It was a stack of photos. They scattered across the floor.
ああ、やっちゃった。
His smile slightly flustered, Ren crouched to pick them up. Akira picked up a few that had fallen by his feet, and gave them a casual glance. Drunks making a scene, a crowd going wild at a fight, dead bodies on the ground. There was little of interest. Only one photograph stood out from the rest. It was pitch black like a malfunction or mistake, but if he strained his eyes, he could see the outline of a person in the darkness. Snapped from behind, it showed a man wearing a long black cloak. Huh? Ren suddenly snatched the picture out of his hand. Is it your daddy? Mildly surprised by his reaction, Akira looked up. You know, what is this? Does he have a lot of belts on him? Kind of like some kind of Final Fantasy reject, you know? With this belt around his neck, too. It's not looking good. I mean, I've already said this before, but... Anyway, mildly surprised by his reaction, Akira looked up. His eyes widened. Rin's stare was as cold as ice. Akira had never seen such an expression on Rin's face before. His smile had vanished, and he exuded a silent, suffocating pressure. A chill ran up Akira's spine.
こんな写真見ても面白くないっしょ。人にぶつかられて思いっきしピンとずれちゃってさ。全然関係ないとこ写ってんの。参っちゃうよね。
And just like that, Rin was grinning again. The sudden shift was disorienting. Had Akira imagined that frigid glare?
アキラ、どうした？
Keisuke, who had been picking up photographs, looked askance at his petrified friend.
いや、
よーし、これでおしまいっと。ありがとう。
Rin took the last one from Keisuke, gathered them all into a bundle, and tucked the bundle back into his waist pouch together with his camera.
本当に写真撮るの好きなんだな。
まあね。
Akira watched warily as Rin nodded and stretched.
そんじゃあさ、こっから移動するんでしょ。あんまり人目につかないとこ教えてあげよっか。
そうだな。そうしてもらえるとありがたいよ。な、アキラ。
うん。
That expression, that stare, he couldn't get it out of his head. Is it turning him on? Until now, Akira had thought of Rin as a relentlessly cheerful sort, mischievous, friendly, and free with his emotions. But was that really the case? Maybe that was a stupid question. To one degree or another, everyone had hidden depths. But it bothered Akira regardless. The shift in Rin's demeanor had been so drastic. The temperature had seemed to drop several degrees.
何？
He turned, smiling from ear to ear.
ん？なんだよ。どうしたの？
いや、なんでもない。
変なの。ほらほら、行こうよ早く。
Ren laughed and then went outside.
アキラ、大丈夫か？
あ
Keisuke peeked at him with a worried expression. Not wanting Keisuke to see his face, Akira quickly headed up for the door. What he was feeling, it wasn't fear. He wasn't worried that Ren might betray them. If Ren's cheerful demeanor was indeed a mask, then there had been a reason he'd chosen to wear it. Now Akira found himself wondering just what that reason was. They felt the air stirring when... God, it's like it opened up the game. They felt the air stirring, because this is the main menu music. They felt the air stirring when they emerged onto the road. A crowd had formed some distance
な
away.
んだろう。バトルやってんのかな。それともまた奴らかな。
Rand stood on tiptoe and tried to see past the throng of people. By those two, he must have meant the executioners. Suddenly the crowd parted, and a man came running towards him as as if hell itself were at his heels.
ああいつ
Oh no, not the Christian! It was the blue-haired man Akira fought only a little while ago.
待てっつってんだろうが。
逃げんな青猿
Not these guys. Ugh, they're so annoying. And behind him, roaring, were the executioners. So he caught their attention after all. Not surprising, given him his admitted preference for foul play.
ああ始まっちゃったよ。知り合いあの青いの。
With an annoyed sigh, Rin glanced back and forth between Keisuke and Akira.
いや
The man had been looking frantically over his shoulder as he ran, but just then he turned to face them. His eyes went as wide as saucers.
お前ら
His bloodshot eyes scanned the trio, then locked onto Akira. Without slowing down, he reached out and grabbed Akira's arm.
アキラ
えちょっと
The man dragged Akira along until he managed to regain his balance, and matched the man's pace. Akira tried to shake him off, but his grip was firm.
話せよ
うるせえいいから走れ
おい
てめえには聞きたいことがあんだよ
How does he pull us along without our consent? Like, just stop moving. Like, he can't run while dragging you. The man pulled him into a maze of alleyways. Rin and Keisuke's voices steadily receded into the distance, and low jeers and heavy footsteps chased after them. Girl, fine. We'll go along with this, but this is stupid. Akira was in the thick of it now. Those executioners were rabid dogs who tortured their prey for no reason at all. If they caught him, that was it. His only choice now was to keep running, even if that meant following this man. His guide set at a desperate pace, racing down the roads that blended together in his mind. A fork in the road appeared. They turned right. Then left. Then left. Then right. What is this? Am I looking up like maze directions for Tomb Raider on game FAQs?
どこ向かってんだよ
Like, seriously, I remember having to do mazes in Tomb Raider. I had to look up directions on game FAQs, so I don't know.
知るか
Before he knew it, they'd run straight into a dead end.
くそ
The man came to an abrupt halt, panting heavily.
こんなところで捕まってたまるかってんだ
Footsteps approached from behind, giving them no time to rest. The executioners were still in pursuit. At this rate, they'd be caught. On instinct, Akira pulled at the man's arm, doubling back down on the dead-end street.
おいどこ行くんだよ
知るか
They ran, turning the corner. The colossal metal box materialized at the side of the road. It was a dumpster large enough for several people to climb inside. In fact, Akira would not be surprised to find the dumpster already occupied, in a manner of speaking. As public safety declined, dumpsters such as these had, with growing frequency, taken the place of coffins. Their airtight specifications kept the stench of rot from leaking out, and in seedy alleys like this, they were largely left abandoned.
一か八かだな
おいまさか
If they kept running, the executioners would catch up with them eventually. It was this or nothing. Why would the executioners catch up with them eventually? They're both human. Like, one of them has to have more endurance than the other. Are you saying you don't have the endurance that they have? Okay, I guess. Akira pressed the switch to open the lid and placed his foot on the rim. The man covered his mouth with his hand. Akira tried to brace himself, but the reek far exceeded his imagination. It turned his face like a physical blow. The stench of death was unmistakable, and yet the dumpster was empty of corpses. He didn't know whether they had been disposed of or had simply rotted away to mere bones. Whatever the case, it was a relief that he wouldn't have to share the space with the body. The smell was bad enough. Just me and the Christian. So, a Christian and an Igra fighter walks into a dumpster and sits in there. The room smells like a dead body. Or the dumpster smells like a dead body. Is that a setup for a joke? Maggots and rotten trash lined the bottom of the tank, but Akira ignored them, burrowed in, pulled the blue hair man after him, and closed the lid. Darkness, heat, the smell. There was nothing else. He could feel his sanity wearing away. Before long, The sound of heavy footfalls drew near. The footsteps stopped beside the dumpster. The executioners were here. This is embarrassing. They just open it up and we're just like, hey. Akira's heart pounded in his chest. His breathing was like thunder in his ears, deafening. Surely they could hear him, his blood, his thoughts. God, Akira's a pussy. Just when he thought he could no longer take it, he heard muddled voices through the metal wall.
まあいいや。今すぐ捕まえなくてもさ。泳がせといて追っかけんのもいいだろう。
Very convenient of you to talk outside this dumpster.
鬼ごっこしとくか。じわじわ追い詰めて恐怖で炙った方がビビってもんや。
The blue-haired man was breathing like he'd been possessed. To Akira, it sounded like a chant. Go away, go away, go away. After holding his breath for what felt like eons, he realized that he could no longer hear the voices. Had they left? He started to rise. Without warning, a loud bang shook the metal compartment. He clenched his jaw to keep his heart from bursting free. Did they know? He slowly sank down again, stifling his breath and straining his ears to catch the slightest sound. But the silence stretched on and on and on. Finally, Akira rose once more and slowly, carefully opened the lid. The heat and nerves were making his palms sweat. He peered through the long, thin crack in the lid, but couldn't detect a human presence. He flung the lid open, jumped out, and sucked in as much air as he could. The blue-haired man also dove out and then burst into a fit of coughing. For the first time, the stale air of Toshima tasted like a slice of heaven. While catching his breath, Akira brushed off the garbage stuck to his body and all but collapsed against the nearby wall. The other man dropped to his knees, deflated.
とんでもねえことしやがるなお前。
Just a trash can, calm down.
お前に言われたくない。
The man shrugged his shoulders a bit, then let out a barking laugh.
理由は
何が。
俺をここまで引っ張ってきた理由だ。
ああ。
The man lifted his head lazily, ignoring Akira's glare, and silently held out his hand.
タグ返せ。
There, Akira remembered that he was carrying the man's tag. He reached automatically towards his jacket pocket, but a thought stopped him short. Why did he have to return it? This man had caused him nothing but trouble.
なんだよ。
返さないって言ったら
てめえ、卑怯だぞ。ルール違反だ。
It was such an impressive display of hypocrisy, Akira couldn't even bring himself to be angry. The man started to rise to his feet, a vein pulsing on his temple. Akira braced himself for a fight, but the man suddenly seemed to wither. He dropped back down and hung his head with a sigh.
返せよ。それがどうしても必要なんだよ。
あれはそんなに大切なものなのか。
あれ？
タグよりも先に拾っていっただろ。
Are you done? Really? That was really quick for the whole sentence. For a moment, the man said nothing. Then, still looking down, he ran both hands through his hair and began to speak.
妹のだ。
妹？
あ、そうだよ。だから早く返せよ。
Sensing with more desperation than fury or hate in his gaze, Akira tossed on the tag with a sigh. From the start, this guy had shown no respect for the rules. Keep his tag, and who knows what he might do. It was better to defuse the situation now. And besides, the mention of his little sister had sucked the tension out of the air. The man glared as he caught the tag. He was making no effort to hide his hostility, but didn't seem about to attack either.
お前、もともと CXC にいたの。
Yes, KFC. Akira looked up, surprised by the question. The man smirked.
やっぱりな。
だったらなんだよ。
道理で見たことあると思ったぜ。お前、ブラスターに参加してただろ。ロストだったが、本名はアキラ。
I had no idea I'd meet fans here. Now Akira was more than just a little surprised. Even in circles where the name Lost held weight, few knew the name Akira.
俺も CXC にいたんだ。
Which meant he had probably fought on the same blaster circuit. Akira sifted through the shallow pool of his memory, but he couldn't recall the face.
それで
ああ、初参加で結構いいとこまで行ったんだぜ。タケルって名前聞いた。
Oops. Kira shook his head. He'd never been good with names.
まあ知らねえだろうな。すぐやめたし。
そうか。
続けられるもんなら続けてたけどな。お家の事情ってやつだ。
Takeru's tone was light, but he looked away and breathed a short sigh. Akira thought he seemed exhausted. Was this how he always looked when he wasn't howling in a rage?
ブラスターは優勝者に賞金が出る。俺はそれが目当てだった。けど、イグラの報酬はそんなもん目じゃねえ。まさしく一攫千金が狙える。だからこっちに来たんだ。
Indeed, the chance to make their fortune drove the vast majority of Eager's participants. Akira's motivation was different, of course, but even setting that aside, he couldn't imagine fighting for money. He had never felt a strong attachment to life, much less anything like that.
お前はさ、なんでイグラに参加したんだ。ブラスターでも優勝しまくって金もたっぷりもらってるんだろ。それじゃ足りなくなるぐらい派手な豪遊でもしてんのか。
Akira glanced at Takeru, sensing something wrong in his flat, toneless voice. Takeru was looking up at him with dark, expressionless eyes. It felt as if he could see straight through him and beyond.
ああ、おい。
そういうものには興味がない。
He had no intention of revealing his mission, so he gave the most truthful answer he could.
あ
But Takeru grimaced conspicuously upon hearing his answer and laughed, narrowing his one eye in contempt.
じゃあなんで参加してんだよ。気まぐれか。ブラスターには勝ちすぎて飽きたから。殺しもありなイグラでもっと刺激が欲しいって。いいよな。不自由してないやつはよ。
His tone began to grow more heated, leaving Akira ill at ease. Takeru may have been looking at him, but his loathing was directed at something else. At some cloud of faceless enemies only he could see.
そんな何も考えずにただフラフラ流されてきただけのやつにはわかんねえだろ。どうせ這い上がりたくても這い上がれない。そんな人間がいるなんて考えたこともないんだろうな。
God, he's annoying and jelly.
おい、
Shoulders shaking, Takeru laughed deep in his throat. His dark eyes were once more burning with hate.
そんなやつばっかりだ。どいつもこいつも。なんとなく生きてるくらいな。なんとなく生きていられるくらいな。死ねばいいじゃねえか。俺はそんなやつには負けねえ。絶対に。
Oh god. Takeru jerked upright and pulled his knife from the sheath at his waist. Rage and malice rolled off him in waves. Clearly the time for talking had passed. Akira threw off his bag and grabbed the hilt of his knife.
そう来なくっちゃな。面白くね。
Takeru cocked his head and flashed a taunting smile. Even as Akira prepared to fight, part of him wondered what had gone wrong. Why was Takeru so obsessed? Did he, like Akira, have a goal to fulfill? Some purpose that prevented him from backing down? One thing was certain, Takeru was nothing like the fighters at the club, whose dead eyes saw nothing but their next fix of Rhine. He wasn't a druggie. This man's passion was hot enough to burn. Ugh, not again, please. Takeru crouched, preparing to charge. At that exact moment, footsteps approached from the far end of the alley. Had the executioners returned? Catching himself just in time, Takeru slowly stepped back, glowering at Akira.
イルレをやるのは俺だからな。邪魔はさせね
With that, he spun and vanished in the blink of an eye. Akira turned to make his own escape. He wasn't about to let the executioners catch him.
アキラ
But the sound of his name brought him up short. He knew this voice. Oh, we know this voice too well. Akira let out a breath out of his lungs, then sheathed his knife, picked up his bag, and began walking towards the approaching footsteps. When he turned at the corner, left at the corner, Rin and Keisuke were there.
Huh?
You know, I think I'm gonna end this episode of Togainu no Chi right here. So thank you all for watching, and next time, Maybe we'll run into the Christian again, but, you know, obviously we knew that Cross was from someone he knew, but he's still the Christian fighter to me. See you guys next time. Bye.